Welcome to News9 Mediaverse, and you are watching On Point with me. And in this special edition of On Point, we are going to talk about the ground operation inside Gaza that has entered a new phase. Many agencies reported hand-to-hand combat inside the Gaza Strip. But the reports also said that the Israeli soldiers are holding ground and the casualties have taken place, which were officially acknowledged by the IDF. 11 soldiers were killed in action. So what do we make of the ground operation? Will it be like Mosul or Aleppo, or will limited evacuation via RAFAH ease the pain of the war? But definitely, it's about holding ground when it comes to war. And ultimately, it boils down to men. But before we go any further, let me take you through all the details first and what is making this theatre unique, what this theatre is about. You must have heard of Gaza tunnels and many other things, but this has been reported by Reuters also. Hand-to-hand combat has taken place in Gaza. Hand-to-hand combat. Anti-tank missiles used against IDF, the Kronets, the Russians in nature. Now it has been updated, 13 Israelis, 13. So yes, the toll has gone up. Soldiers in parts have entered Gaza tunnels. The combat is taking place in the tunnels also. And that's dangerous. Tunnels with a range of 500 square kilometer, 1300 in number. And communications are down in Gaza Strip, but that's the logistic part that the army must have ensured that it's not used by enemy network. 13 Israeli soldiers dead. More than 8,000 killed in Gaza bombing. That's the collateral, and the sources are from the Gaza Ministry of Health. So that's the numbers come from that. 1/10 of the Gaza has been destroyed. It's not habitable. That part is not habitable at all. 280,000 people are homeless. That is what Hamas has brought Gaza down to. That's what Hamas has done. It's on them because they were the one who perpetrated the terror attack. Now, if we compare it, urban warfare in the Iraqi town in 2016, the battle for Mosul, the urban warfare in the Iraqi town in 2016 and 17, what was it like? 9,000 lives were lost, 0.6% of the city's population. That was the Battle of Mosul. It's just a reminder, just to give you an understanding what these battles are like. It tells you that these battles are messy. Most residential buildings were damaged. Most residential buildings were damaged. And they became inhabitable. 900,000 civilians fled the city. That was the Battle of Mosul, where the liberation forces, which is Iraqi plus American forces, were operating. Moving forward, why Gaza can be bloodier than Mosul? ISIS held Mosul for 2 years. Hamas has been remaking Gaza for last 16 years. They are in charge of Gaza for last 16 years. ISIS could control it for 2 years. So imagine what would they have done. They have defenses built under civilian infrastructure. We have to understand the nature of bombing which Israel is doing. Israel's offensive in Gaza is intensive. It's 6,000 bombs dropped in 1 week, but it is not the first time in Mosul. More than 7,000 bombs were dropped. So, it cannot be said that, Israel stands out. As I said, US and its allies dropped 7,000 bombs in Mosul over 2 months. So, it's not as if such bombings have not taken place. In fact, during the Korean War, the entire American machinery dropped bombs which were equal to what they used in the Second World War. That was the intensity of bombing of the Korea. But that's for a different time, different debate. But then this is something very important which I have written. IDF has little affinity with the civilians in Gaza. This is an important thing. A lot of people are radicalized, but in Mosul, you had people who were opposed to ISIS. So those sections of the cities were liberated first, who were more in tune with the co-patriots. Now, that's a different thing which the Israeli experts would answer. Aditya in the studio, who has visited Israel a number of times, will answer. Does that population segment exist in Gaza which can support Israelis? And Mosul hospitals were stuck after long periods of bombing, which means the collateral were less. Now here, since hospitals are built on top of the administrative units of Hamas, so hospitals become legitimate target. That's what the Hamas has done. And Israel is striking hospitals in Gaza that Hamas use as base. So you have a base beneath the hospital, so which is called the double use of a civilian property. So that is why Gaza in a way is similar to Mosul, but it's also very different from Mosul. It has similarities but dissimilarities. And in Mosul, civilians hated ISIS and helped liberation forces. I would say not all, but a huge section of it. I don't know whether such support would emanate from the Gaza Strip. It can be radicalization, it can be the uniqueness of their interaction with the Israeli government, but then that difference does exist. Similarities and what is not similar. And then Israel can only rely on electronic intelligence in Gaza. It's obvious that the sort of human capability will not be there in such a short period of time, isn't it, Aditya?
Absolutely. You said human intelligence. What many people don't know, Kartike, is that a lot of assets of the Israeli IDF, the Aman, the Mossad are actually inside the population of the Gazans. That means that immediately after the October 7 attack, Kartike, a lot of these people who speak Arabic fluently, who look like Arabs but are actually Israelis, have merged within the population, and their primary task right now is to look for the hostages either in the tunnels in the Gaza metro or in the neighborhoods, hospitals or other places where they could be hiding. So human intelligence is of paramount. There are people on ground, but the population is certainly against Israel.
Okay, that's very important. I'm also joined by Lev Aran, Israeli columnist and journalist. A very warm welcome to you for joining me on my show. And I'm also joined by PK Mishra, former Assistant Director, SPG and Additional Director General of BSF and CRPF. Thank you very much, sir, for joining me.
Yeah,
I'll straight away.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Straight away, I'll go to Lev first. Lev joins me from Israel. Lev, tell me, what do we make of the sort of combat which is taking place in Gaza, the hand-to-hand combat?
First of all, we know that we lost 13 soldiers, and we know that Hamas launched anti-tank missiles, and that our ASPRO did not work, or it was not there. We still don't know. But 9 of the 13 soldiers were on a APC that belonged to us, and we lost there 9 of the 13 soldiers. So this is like on the tactical level. On the strategic level, we can say that only using the air to attack Gaza became less legitimate for the international community, at least for some of them, and also for the liberal media in the West the last 2-3 days. And also inside Israel, there was a bigger pressure that we cannot bank on Air Force alone. If we want to win the war, we need to risk our soldiers and get into Gaza. One of the soldiers that was killed, Benaya Mark, comes from a very important and famous martyred family in Israel. Also, his father was murdered by Palestinians in the West Bank. So now I think we as Israelis, we understand what is the price of getting into Gaza with tanks and infantry.
Very well put. As I said, I'm joined by Mr. PK Mishra. So what do we make of this hand-to-hand combat? Ultimately, it is telling us that the war is messy and men have to hold the ground. It has boiled down to that, isn't it, sir?
Yes, Karthikeyan, I will just tell you that the 13th soldier, Israeli soldier who was killed was Rui Sargasti, and they name each and every soldier killed there. What is now happening is hand-to-hand fight and built-up area fight, and ground force, they go to built-up area. In a built-up area, I was just telling about Mosul. It's difficult because the force which attacks, who is in offensive, definitely he will lose more. I was listening to the previous speaker. He was telling only with Air Force attack on Air Force, you cannot win a war. It requires ground position. Your ground force must occupy, they must advance, and they must finish the troops. Here, opposite side, here what happens? As you told, most of the hospitals, most of the educational institutions, and most of the masjids, mosques, they are the addas and the base of Hamas. The number of tunnels are there. The Israelis, they have to definitely go for a mark on oil, food, electricity, ventilation, and all this technicality they have to do for choking all these tunnels. But it will take time until and unless you don't hold the ground. Holding the ground in the say built up area, because every house will be definitely covered by Hamas. And there are anti-tank weapons, Russian anti-tank weapons and North Korean anti-tank weapons which have already come, and they can well utilize it against Israel armed forces. So this is what I am telling you, what Israel is doing. The Mossad, Shin Bet and Aman, they have amalgamated and they have created a brigade called Indigo. And the Indigo has gone into Gaza, and they have already mixed into Gaza people, and they are getting field intelligence. The Indigo has started operating. They are the best part of Israel soldier, taken from Mossad, Shin Bet and Aman. Aman is the army intelligence. Shin Bet is their internal intelligence, like our IB, and Mossad is like R&AW. So from these three organizations, they have made Indigo, and Indigo is now operating in Gaza. It has to be seen how they will be successful in coming to know the correct intelligence of the location of Hamas leaders. Of course, they have killed Hamas leaders, I mean, yesterday.
Mr. Mishra,
yeah.
It is there are multiple facets to this conversation, because what's really happening in Gaza is unique in a way that unlike Americans who publicize their wars, Israelis have taken a different way. Americans embedded the entire media, and then the Iraq war became actually a global war. And they did it in a very different way. Vietnam war was covered by the media from an adversarial perspective. But there was embedded journalism which the Americans did in the Iraqi theatre. I'm very happy that I'm also joined by Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me on my show. So first I'll take your opening comment about the sort of theatre has opened up, hand-to-hand combat has taken place, 13 soldiers have been killed in action. What is it telling us? Because communications are down. The war is being fought differently. It's not being covered, or it's not being made to cover the way Americans do it. So this theatre is behaving very, very differently. So your opening comments.
Thank you, Karthikeya, for inviting me. Better than Mosul, the better example is twice the Americans had to capture a city called Fallujah. First time they captured it, and then they had lost it because they didn't control it well. Then they did the second time. The second time took 7-8 months for them to capture Fallujah as a city. Similarly, Russians had done on a Grozny in Chechnya, and Grozny capture, which is also a city, took as much of time. So there are about 60 odd examples of urban sieges being carried out in the course of last 50, 60 years. So, this is one more example of the similar events happening here. Now, what I am speaking probably as an analyst for warfare and not taking sides between Israel and Hamas. The initial preparation of the battlefield was carried out to allow the pincers to advance, which is the ground forces to advance. So the initial areas close to the fence and the wall were actually cleared out in a manner so that the advance is possible. And 2-3 nights, forays were made for clearing up these areas so that advance. Now, in the course of last 2-3 days, I think the Israeli plans have become clearer. There are 3 pincers that are moved inside with armor, and infantry have moved inside Gaza. One is from the north, which comes along all along the periphery of the river, sea. It's along the Mediterranean coast. Second one is coming from the northeast. The major one is coming across from the eastern side, which is halfway of the Gaza territory. Now, what happens is that halfway territory, Gaza is only 7.5 kilometers wide before you come to the sea. That pincer will split Gaza into 2 parts, the northern Gaza and the southern Gaza. And the pincer which is coming from along the sea Mediterranean coast, which has got to travel 19 kilometers from the fence right up to join up with the eastern pincer, which actually isolate the complete the northern Gaza. Now, that by itself is a major operation. Here, the clearance of houses is not so essential. It is just to isolate the northern Gaza away from the southern Gaza, where larger population is moved in. And then they have the opportunity, having prepared the battlefield, having carried out a siege of the northern Gaza, to clear it in piecemeal. Now, this is all very well done. We have to examine as to what is the Israeli aim? What do they want to achieve?
Correct.
So I think one good answer was given by Anthony Blinken yesterday in the Senate Appropriations Committee, when he said very clearly, look, we will not allow Hamas to remain subsequently after Gaza operations is over, which means since there is a recuperability which is possible of the Hamas, so there possibility of it being vacated subsequently is not there. And therein comes the most important issue here, that finally it seems that the Americans and the Israelis are hoping for a kind of international peacekeeping force that will take charge of the entire area so that Hamas is not retained as effective force. This you gather from what Blinken said yesterday in the Appropriations Committee. So one major aim is to clear the areas and hand it over to an international force, which will actually thereafter manage Gaza as a place, as international forces have been doing in, say, Lebanon or in Golan Heights or in Congo. So there is this. I can give out 3-4 more aims that comes out. But I think now, in the course of 2 days, the entire methodology of how Israelis are going about clearing the areas has become crystal clear.
Sharma, that was a very important interjection. Aditya Rajkol this side. I just wanted to ask you, you made a very pertinent point about, how the Americans really want to put in some kind of a peacekeeping force. Well, that's taking care of Gaza in the long run, perhaps, or perhaps in the short run. But what stops Hamas from attacking Israel from other corners? I was listening to the Hamas top leaders from Qatar who were speaking on the Arabic channels, and they said that, we will repeat October 7 terror attacks every time possible in future, because we are the victims and everything we do is justified according to their ideology. So how do they control the overall situation? Because now the Yemen has joined the war. We've seen the reactions coming in from Turkey, Egypt and other areas as well. And of course, the serial provocator in chief, Iran, in the region. So do you feel this will escalate further, or what would be the strategy of the Americans and the Israelis to control the situation?
Okay, thank you, Aditya. A valid point. Firstly, it is only an informed guess or informed analysis that you can give out today. In my personal opinion, the enlargement of conflict beyond Israel and the areas of Palestine is most unlikely, because Iran has got its own internal problems. The Arab world has already joined up hands with kind of Israelis and with Chinese and with Americans involved there, so they're getting involvement is very difficult. Jordan has clearly said we will not take any Palestinian refugees. Egypt has said, please do not even send them to Sinai. I mean, taking into mainland Egypt is something different, not even in Sinai. Turkey is making noise, but the noise is a noise. It's not actually getting involved. So I personally feel is that it is enlargement beyond the scope of the immediate is not feasible. But I'll add one issue here. The issues of West Bank. Now, we talk Gaza, we're forgetting West Bank. West Bank has had about 125 casualties from 7th of October onwards. And West Bank, if you see the map of West Bank, and you've traveled across to those areas, the areas in the proximity of the Jordan River which is, further away from Israel, are actually all occupied by Israel, because Israel has got 60% of the territory of West Bank occupied by these settlements, which started about from 1967 onwards, after the war. So the point is, they, all this while, they do not want an intifada or some problems taking place in West Bank, because they lost, there was a 6 lakh Israelis, Jews staying in West Bank, and messed with a population of about 2.5 million of Palestinians who are kind of ghettos. There are many small ghettos of the kind of Gaza in West Bank. Once Gaza, West Bank takes off, then to control the damages or the casualties to the West Bank of the occupied territories and settlements, population will be too much. That's why Israel is now supplying weapons across to settlements to these people to fight themselves. So the major anxiety that comes in the area of West Bank, because the population is enmeshed there. In Gaza, they are saying, okay, we do not differentiate between Hamas and Palestinians, which is wrong, absolutely wrong. But then they are saying we do not differentiate between them. If they are Hamas being killed or Palestinians being killed, we take it as one body, because Palestinians, they were supporting Hamas. There is a differentiation here. Minute it spreads across towards West Bank, then they will be held to pay in the entire region, and larger conflagration can take place.
Okay, I'm also joined by Dr. Alexander Greenberg. Dr. Greenberg, today the Houthis fired a ballistic missile, which the arrow system was able to bring it down. Does it change things with a ballistic missile being fired at Israel by Houthis? Does it change a lot of things?
I don't think it changes a lot. Of course, from the point of view of the Palestinians, if I read in Arabic all the Hamas channels or Telegram, yes, of course, they're happy to see the Houthis joining the battle, but it is not a game changer for the current war. Of course, the Houthis launched the ballistic missiles on the order of Iran, and it is Iranian-made missiles, drones, but either they were intercepted by American ships in the area there, or they were intercepted by aero system. But of course, it can damage a lot in principle. But the number of missiles that can launch is limited. It is only serves as a reminder that who is behind these militias, which is Tehran. But it doesn't change the things on the ground.
It doesn't change the thing on the ground, but the sort of action which is taking place, it just tells us that one, ultimately it will boil down to men, one. Secondly, there will have to be some sort of a holding of the land for some time so that the clearing takes place. And third, and the most important aspect is that right now, the sort of action which is being done is unprecedented in nature, because not only Israel is fighting on the ground, it is also fighting a subterranean battle with the Hamas terrorists. Does it make Gaza theatre the most different and the most dangerous theatre in the world?
Well, I think it's on the one hand, yes, definitely so. You're right, because this underground element is a decisive one, and of course, it's as no, I cannot, at least myself, I'm experiencing a difficulty to remember any parallels with that. But on the other hand, it is still, I wouldn't say it is the most dangerous. It is one, because the IDF doesn't destroy simply Gaza, because if it were just another army, they would just bomb like the Americans did Mosul. There were no considerations about not hitting the civilians. And of course, there is also, I believe, there is a very serious consideration of hostages. I don't know what the IDF knows or not about the hostages held in Gaza, but there's also without any doubt, it impacts the course of the action of the IDF. Because several days ago, the IDF and the security service managed to release one female soldier, and of course, to supply the intelligence. And we don't know a lot about this underground system, and some of the hostages are held in private families and not with Hamas terrorists. So it's also a consideration, but again, it's only my speculation. No one really knows what is going on the ground.
Oh, absolutely, it's a different war. When I say it's very different from the way Americans fought it, you know, it's not as if the media has been carried inside. There's a communication blackout. It creates security for the forces. So it's not as if the Iraq 1 and Iraq 2 was conducted. But then, yes, when the Arrow system came into action, a lot of people, whether the Times of Israel, Jerusalem Post, they did write articles. It changes a lot of things. You know, before I go any further, let us play out the bite of the IDF spokesperson and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's listen to both of them first.
We are in a tough war. It will be a long war. We've had significant achievements, but also a painful loss. We know each one of our soldiers is a whole world. And I say to the dear families, the people of Israel are with you in your time of this unbearable great sorrow. We hug you wholeheartedly. Our soldiers have fallen in an utmost just war, a war on our home. And I promise to all citizens of Israel, we will get the job done. We will press ahead until victory. Hoshen stations, this is the commander. On Saturday morning, October 7th, the holiday of Simchat Torah, the vile enemy launched a murderous and heinous terrorist attack against children, women, men, and the elderly. We did not choose this battle. The enemy wanted it. The enemy started it. The eyes of the whole world are looking at us. The people of Israel trust us and stand behind us. Many forces of the 162nd Division and of the Southern Command will go out to destroy and eliminate the hand that reached to strangle our necks. We will strike our enemies with a clenched fist and steel-like strength. There is no task we cannot do. There is no terrorist we will not strike. I am committed to be by your side on the battlefield, shoulder to shoulder. We will not return home until we have fully completed our mission. Hoshen stations, this is the commander. It is our time to strike.
Okay, now let me come to some point-blank questions. Aditya, who has advantages in Gaza? Is it the Israeli army or Hamas right now?
Well, initially, of course, it is the Hamas which is advantage. It knows the territory much better than the Israelis. It has hideouts, it has tunnels, it has much more ammunition and rockets as of now already stored. And of course, it has men, it has terrorists to sacrifice themselves. They don't care about the sacrifice of their men or even their families. And the other part is that they're using civilians as human shields. Many of them are not allowed to leave the territory. So I think in the initial phase, that's why the Israelis are facing a lot of killings as well. And what I have come to know that these are precise strikes that they are doing. And the main target is to capture as much territory as possible and secondly get the hostages. Because what happens is that the Hamas is very well equipped and they're ready to sacrifice themselves completely. So I think it will be a very long operation and we've seen the initial phase of it. What the Israelis are also trying to do is they're using more airstrikes even now rather than going all in through the ground.
Okay, now this question is common to all my panelists. This question will be common to all my panelists because I had the opportunity to interview General Sharma some time ago on the issue of the tanks in Ukraine. So first you have, is the Operation Gaza breaking the myth of a bloodless war, the 80s and 90s and super focused in early 2000 of the Special Operation Commands? Because what we have seen in the Ukrainian and the Gazan theatre is the return of the infantry, return of the armored carrier personnel and return of the tank. I'm just something which people thought will be of no use in the future wars. Lev.
Yes, I think that the idea that we can win a war by a very good air force, it has collapsed in our Lebanese war of 2006. And now it is also irrelevant. Of course, it is relevant to use the air force to weaken the Hamas. And then our tanks and infantry, their job is a bit easier. Again, Easier is not a good word. We see the 13 soldiers that were martyred. But I think that in a way, our trauma, the fact that more than 200 people were murdered on the first day, makes the sacrifice, I wouldn't say easier, because sacrifice is never easy, but I don't think that we 1 month ago believed that psychologically as Israelis, we can face a battle against Hamas with so many dozens of soldiers that may be killed. But the fact that the first day we lost so many innocent people, also it gives some kind of purpose, even for peace-loving Israelis who always believed in peace with Hamas, with the Palestinian Authority, two-state solution, and so on. There is some kind of a unity that also gives a lot of energy to the forces that are now inside Gaza.
Mr. Mishra, has it broken that myth of a clean war theater, Ukraine and Gaza, that special operation groups and Air Force would be enough, a surgical strike in that will end it? What happened in the Korean War or the Vietnam War is not going to be the reality of war in future. But what has happened in the last 24 months is that the infantry is back, your regular forces are back, your regular ordnance is back.
Yes, it is absolutely correct. The war will be fought by ground forces. The war cannot be won by Air Force bombardment. It was proved in Ukraine also, and it is being proved here also in Gaza. Just see, bombarding and telling that you can demolish all these tunnels, not possible. It is the ground forces which must advance and take position, and then only you can demolish them. It's Israel which has advanced up to 5 kilometers only, but yet
Caution station.
for their
This is
advance
the
they
commander.
need Air Force definitely for giving a covering fire. But the built up accommodation and in the ground forces when they operate, there will be casualty. Like today they had 11 casualties, and there will be more casualty because Hamas is also trained for the last 6 to 7 years, and they are ready to fight it back. They are not going to give it up just now. This war will continue for long. That Mr. Netanyahu knows it very well. And there are, I see, like West Bank is there, the Hezbollah is there, the Yemen has already come, and Red Sea, they have sent Israeli warship has gone to Red Sea also. Other fronts are there, but to win over Gaza, it will be a terrific affair because the ground forces have to hold the ground.
So,
They
when
have
you,
to
Mr. Mishra, when you
advance
say
and
the
hold
ground forces needs to hold the ground,
Clear the
Aditya, when ground
Clear the
forces need to hold the ground, you need population to support. I understand that the Israel is trying to shift the population to the south, but then again you need population to support. Is that possible in northern Gaza right now?
Not at all. The population will never support the Israelis, and the Israelis are very well aware of it. And that's why they are doing these small operations on the ground level. As I said, and I've been repeating this from the very first day, they will not send in hundreds and thousands of troops at once, because then they face heavy casualties. What they will do is small teams of special forces that will go based on intelligence inputs and try to take as much territory as possible. Even Hamas in its initial statement has said that Israel is going to those areas that have been bombarded already and trying to take control of these places. So the population will not be in favor of Israelis, not today, not tomorrow. But the Israelis are aware of it, and that is why they have planned this operation in a certain way where they get time to have.
That is why they asked them to go to South Gaza?
Absolutely. They want to delay, the casualties, of course, the civilian casualties that are taking place. And of course, there is American pressure. There is pressure from the Arab world that civilians should leave Gaza. In fact, there is an important update that today the RAFAH border was opened and a lot of civilians, especially foreigners with injuries who are wounded, have been actually sent to Egypt via the RAFAH border through Gaza. So I think continuously the bombardments are on. In fact, we are receiving messages from the IDF of how the ground troops are being supported by the airstrikes. So it is a long war. And of course, these small strikes will continue to happen. They have been trying to strike the tunnels as well. So I think it's not an easy task. And a lot of these tunnels have exits and entry points in hospitals, schools, and UN compounds. So, the Israelis are well aware, but still, there's a lot that the Hamas has built in these last 10 years. That needs to be unraveled. That's why they'd want to avoid as much as civilian casualties and the IDF casualties. And that's why we'll see them moving in a step-by-step manner.
Janvir Sharma, the same question to you, that the Ukrainian and the Gazan war theatre, has it really busted the myth and long held, not to use the word mentality, but a view that the future wars would be different, bloodless, much more cleaner, surgical in nature. But what you find ultimately is the men are fighting the war. It's messier, something which we had to do in Kargil. Ultimately, our men, they had to climb those fierce cliffs by their own hand, and they fought and retrieved the Indian land. That's how we got back our territory. That was the big sacrifice of the young men of the Indian army. So similarly, the Israelis are fighting against the Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. But ultimately, it's boiling down to this, and Ukraine and Gaza is showing that something within the larger functioning of the army, which was being reformulated, they need to hold. Things have not completely changed.
Thank you, Kartikeya. You raised a question which is music to my ears, because I'm an infantry officer and I spent 40 years in the army in the infantry, so that's music. But I think the question is a trap. Your question is a trap. How do you say which is the right answer? First issue is, what's the aim of war? What is the aim of a particular war? Did Russians have to fight a war in 2014 to capture the entire Crimean Peninsula? They didn't have to fire a single shot. They just occupied the peninsula. Did the Chinese have to fight a war over thousands and thousands of square kilometers of South China Sea? They just went across and occupied it. Did the Chinese have to fight a war fighting bullets in eastern Ladakh, where they denied us patrolling rights by actually dominating some heights all along the eastern Ladakh, and they didn't have to fight a single bullet? It's the aim of war. The aim of war in Ukraine actually implied that the Russians required a land bridge to support Crimea, and they had to move across from Donbass, which they deemed as their own territory, to occupy Donbass and then establish the land bridge across to Crimea, for which occupation of territory was essential, that they had to fight a war. It's undoubtedly. In case of Israel, you cannot make out who is Hamas. Of the 2.5 million people, is there a stamp on somebody's forehead to say, I am Hamas? Hamas fellow is not wearing a uniform. He's a hybrid fellow. He could be a man studying in a school or a college today who's picked up a weapon and fighting it. And Hamas, they say, are about 30,000 people in a population of 2.5 million. They're not uniformed people. So now, to clear the area of Hamas, which is a belligerent organization and did dastardly, terrifying act on 7th of October, there is just no way except going into Gaza and finding out who is Hamas. Is he Hamas or is he a civilian? And you can have collateral damage. See, there is a finite window that the Israelis have got over using all type of bombardment to kill whole lot of people, not identifying whether a Hamas fellow is being killed or civilian. So you said 30,000 Hamas. Now, 10,000 people have already been killed in Gaza. 20,000 people have been injured, which means 30,000 people have already lost their lives, or they are not available in Gaza, which means the entire Hamas has gone. No, because you don't know which is Hamas, who's not Hamas. The population may support Hamas totally, but then you can't. There are also innocent people there who are inclined towards Hamas, but they are not soldiers. Here is a hybrid war. This is what all countries have been talking over a period of time. What happens when there is a hybrid war? When you can't distinguish between an innocent civilian and a man who's taken a weapon against us, that becomes a problematic situation. The only way is to sift it out, and it's a Herculean task. I'll have one more point. See, often estimates are that the Hamas would have fired about 50% of their total rockets that they would have made. This is an informed guess made here, which means if they have fired about 6,000, 7,000 rockets, there are 6,000, 7,000 rockets and other missiles and this kind already lying as a wherewithal in some tunnels or some storage or some places. Now you have to find it, because this is a very potent weaponry which is existing there. So it's not a question of finding Hamas alone. It's also a question of finding every war fighting wherewithal which has been buried and kept into safe side, and also get their hostages out. This is one of the most difficult operations. And I'll end by saying, hostages is not a new thing in Hamas and Israel. This is a regular feature. It's been happening over a period of time. People are lifted up, soldiers, civilians, they're lifted up and taken away. Even Hamas leaders have been lifted and taken by Israel and put into jail and released subsequently in some time. So hostages is a game which is being played between Israel and Hamas for a very long period of time. It is there. But here, there are larger number of hostages, and there are people, there are children, there are women, there are elderly ladies, elderly men, which is not normal among hostages. So you have to actually sift it out. This is a hybrid war of a kind that needs to be studied in that end. We studied Ukraine because Ukraine also had brought in hybrid people, the International Force for Ukraine warriors, and all these people who are just collected together, who are fighting on behalf of Ukraine. And the Russians had a Wagner group. Partly Wagner was also not in uniform. They were also fighting, but they were forces fighting. Here, you don't know who is fighting on the opposing side. Very difficult war of this kind, where there will be many more much more collateral damage that will take place before you are able to clean out the area of Hamas.
Dr. Alexander Greenberg, what sort of a time frame do you expect? What is your assessment? The operation is on, the communication blackout is there, people can only make an informed guess, like deduction. What is your assessment in terms of the time of the operation? Depth of the operation, only the military would know.
I think it is only beginning, and judging by what we can hear from the IDF spokesperson, I think it will take at least a month or two, at least.
Because, 2 months, Dr. Greenberg? 2 months?
2 months or more, because judging by what, look, there are very many variables here upon which the further developments will depend. First of all, for example, regarding the fight underground, I believe that once the surface comes under the control of the IDF, after the IDF engineering units manage to clear the mines and to suppress the points from which they shoot anti-tank guided missiles, then further advancement will be easier. But regarding the fight in the tunnels or against the tunnels, so they know that the IDF disposes of several devices and special bombs designed for fighting in the tunnels. There is also a dog unit, Ockets, whose dogs are trained to fight and to bring cameras and to fight terrorists in the tunnels. There is a special unit of combat engineering, SAMUR. They have robots and something, and etc., etc. Of course, it's not a silver bullet. Still, the fight will be very difficult, but IDF has means to cope with this problem. And the last, I think the most important thing, it is true that this system of underground tunnels, or it's called the Hamas Metro, is a huge strategic and tactic advantage of Hamas, without any doubt. But on a certain moment, the adversary, or IDF in this case, controls the surface, then
Doctor,
this
is it tougher than
advantage.
the Tora Bora movement? Is it tougher than the Tora Bora movement?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. So it's not like we control them from above. And what I want to say is that at a certain moment, once all the Hamas elite forces are concentrated in the tunnels, if the IDF finds the entries of the tunnels, then it will be the Hamas fighters will be locked there, because you cannot deploy forces in the tunnels.
Correct.
And their fuel is they're running short of fuel. That was the goal of delaying the ground operation with the fuel, because the fuel is a crucial material for Hamas for generating power for ventilation and airing in the tunnels. So it's not only that the time works only against Israel, also against them. And the example of Russian fight in Ukraine, the Azovstal was mentioned. So here it was it was not a system of tunnels there. It was only one tunnel, and the unit troops were not so many as there are now in Gaza. And the most important thing is that we cannot compare two wars judging by technical parameters alone, but we always must account for the importance of culture and motivation that is behind the war. So I don't think it's legitimate to compare the Russian war, where the soldiers are not motivated to put it mildly. The Ukrainians are fighting for their land against Russian occupation. And here again, everyone realizes in Israel that the fight will claim the lives of many soldiers. No one has doubts that people are ready to sacrifice, because it is the thing that is needed to be done. There's no other option.
I think Dr. Alexander has been saying this since beginning, Aditya, that there's a political consensus, social consensus, if the word is correct, within Israel, that the price will have to be paid. But I think he made a very important point, Aditya. A quick reaction from you, which Dr. Alexander Greenberg made. He said they would lock the tunnels, which means that they will not fight into the tunnels. They will not put their troops in a position where they are locked in a fight. He's saying that they will lock them in the tunnels.
You know, the thing is that, Karthikeya, the Israelis will not venture inside the tunnels, because that's an open trap. They could be booby traps, they could receive fire from any angle, and they do not really have, at least of the major part of these tunnels, the internal mapping system. So how do they actually go? They can actually lead to massive casualties for the IDF. So yes, they will block it. And the kind of power that the Israelis use, and they do not think twice before acting against terrorists, they could actually block them inside. Now, how they will they use these missiles that they have acquired from the US to strike at these tunnels, or do something else? Only time will tell.
I think that's a very important point which Dr. Greenberg made. A lot of people are thinking, what are they going to do? Are they going to use some sort of a gas? Are they going to flood them with some sort of water? Or they're going to starve them, But to say to block the tunnels, it means that they're going to restrict them inside. I know it's not a nice thing to say, but imagine you have 20,000 fighters in the tunnel and you start blocking them, the tunnel itself becomes a prison. So, either they come out, surrender, or it becomes their burial ground, if that's the word I may use, the burial ground for the terrorists. With that, I leave you with the right of the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Please listen in.
We are in a tough war. It will be a long war. We've had significant achievements, but also a painful loss. We know each one of our soldiers is a whole world. And I say to the dear families, the people of Israel are with you in your time of this unbearable great sorrow. We hug you wholeheartedly. Our soldiers have fallen in an utmost just war. a war on our home. And I promise to all citizens of Israel, we will get the job done.
News9 big coverage of 5 assembly polls. Mandate 2023.